Personas. Maybe you love them, maybe you hate them, but you have definitely seen a lot of them around.
And today, we're going to spend some time on them.
Take Rachel, a small business owner. According to this persona, one of Rachel's key objectives is to save time online. Now take this, the casual, the business, and the power user. Pete always has his mobile device on him, but Jennifer and Brett don't. I mean, who doesn't have their mobile devices with them nowadays anymore? Finally, take this, Legalese Leonard, whose business has very specific needs that can be addressed by a generic software solution. These personas are creating stereotypes, not archetypes. They suck. They are putting people in boxes. They don't really represent the complexity of your user groups, and they actually don't represent the complexity of anyone's user group. As a profession, it seems like we have slipped into this bad habit of designing personas like that, and it feels like we're okay with that, and that's not good. I mean, bad personas will lead to bad design decisions, so this is a whole problem for the whole of the research community. This is a particularly critical problem for us because we work with one of the most stereotyped user groups in the planet, prisoners. I'm Carol, and I work as a service designer in the UK Ministry of Justice.
I'm Amber, and I'm a senior user researcher here at the UK Ministry of Justice. We design services, policies, and systems for people going through the worst moments of their lives. And today, we want to talk to you about our ideas for personas. In this talk, we will cover why we think personas are dead, how we can revive them, we'll give you a handy framework for how to do just that, and finally, we'll talk about how to have maximum impact with your personas in your organisation. Our users are prisoners. That means they're often out of sight, out of mind by default. They are physically locked up in rural, hard-to-reach places, which makes it really difficult for people in our organisation who have to design services and policies for those users' needs. It's a real problem for those who work in government, actually, because we're making decisions that affect the outcomes of people's lives. But it gets even worse, because this user group, prisoners, is actually already really stereotyped. All you have to do is look across media. Take Orange is the New Black, or Prison Break, or simply look at the tabloids, and you'll see how quickly they are stereotyped. So that makes it even harder for these colleagues in our organisation. They're having to battle these stereotypes that are embedded and engrossed in our society. And the best tool that we have to offer them are those personas that we showed you earlier. And that sucks, because we can't afford to let them make these kind of decisions based on that poor information. We had to do something about it. We had to address the skeleton in the cupboard. What's killed personas?
This brings us on to the first point of our presentation. What has killed personas? 3 things have killed personas. Personas have become templated. There's nothing wrong with a template. However, there is a problem when a template is used as the end point rather than the start point. Personas have become so specific that the information that they provide teams with is not very helpful, really. Personas have become superficial. They aren't based on research. People are creating personas based on assumptions that they have from their users or things that they've collected for other purposes, not for creating personas. You don't need to understand how much someone earns in order to relate to them, and you definitely don't need to see a photograph of them. In fact, by providing that information to your staff, what you're saying is that someone can only have certain features or behavior in case they earn that much money or they look like that, which is wrong. But don't worry, not all is lost. We have done the hard work for you, and we have done a lot of work. We went back to the academia and we spoke to professors who have been doing personas right for decades. Amber studied in the University of Oxford, so we went back and we spoke to one of our professors who had reminded us that there's actually an entire field in research dedicated to what we were trying to do. It's called qualitative data analysis. He had reminded us to be systematic about our data and also to apply rigorous and consistent methods when analyzing the data. We explored anatomy, folklore, and mythology to try and understand how archetypes are built in these worlds. You'll see later on in this presentation how that has influenced our design approach to personas. We have also looked at plays, museums, and books to better understand storytelling and how complex characters are communicated in these spaces. So what do we propose? We propose to remove all the heuristics that create biases in our personas. So what we are saying is that good personas should not have genders, names, interests, photographs, or salaries. This might sound quite radical because it's not very often that we see personas like that, especially on product or service-oriented businesses. But that's what we are suggesting you to do. We suggest moving from the current approach to personas to a meaningful alternative, where you throw away any bias that is carried by demographics and focus on what really matters, who your users are as people, and where you strip out looks and personifications. We all know that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Alright, so far we have explored why the current approach to personas isn't working.
So we've explored why personas are dead. Now it's time to figure out how to revive them. So what do you need? Well, not a lot actually. You can do this with very little time and a small team and a few tools that you probably already know. Here's some examples of the tools that we used. We used Notion. It's a wiki. We use Miro, a collaborative whiteboarding tool. We use Google Sheets for data processing. And we use Dovetail for analysis and synthesis. But you can use anything that you've got your hands on or a subscription to, as long as it fulfills that functionality. So we've taken everything we've learned and we put it into 5 simple steps, a framework that you can follow to create successful personas. Don't worry, we're going to go into each step into detail so that you can follow along. But you should follow every step in order to get successful personas. Step 1, understand that your users are human. They're not using your tool or service in a vacuum. It's part of their daily lives, so you need to understand what goes on in their lives, what influences them, what they care about, and what they think. In order to do this, you've got to ask rich questions. These are the type of questions that get to the root of what someone cares about. It's a guided conversation rather than a questionnaire. And this is what we did. We could have gone into prison and spoken to prisoners about what life in prison is like. We could have asked them things like, what do you miss? What do you do every day? We would have got really interesting responses, sure, but we wouldn't have got the kind of insights that we need to make useful personas. Instead, we asked them questions that we could have asked anyone, whether they were a prisoner or not. For example, what does a good day look like in here? What are you most proud of? These type of rich questions let people showcase what matters to them. And that's really important for personas, showcasing what matters to people, not telling people what matters to them. So there you have it. Step 1, rich questions. Ask them, not dumb questions.
Step number 2, write a code book. So you collected your data and it's now time to start analyzing it. This is where a code book will become handy. So you might be asking, what is a code book? Put simply, a code book is basically a map that will help you analyze your data. As you go through the data, certain themes will start to emerge. Each theme will become a code. Give a name to that code, write a definition for it, and attach examples of what it is and what it isn't. This will create your code book. You can start with 5 codes, 10 codes, 20 codes. It doesn't really matter, because as you start analyzing your data and become more familiar with it, that code will evolve and you will refine it as you go. It is very important for you to keep a code book because it will help your whole team to be on the same page when analyzing the data. It's something that academics use all the time when doing personas right, but it seems like it's something that we as a profession forgot about it.
Step 3, it's time to use that code book as a map to code your data. You want to have it handy. You should print it so that it's next to you, or if you can, you should project it so the whole team can see it. Whatever you choose, make sure it's easily at hand. At this point, it's really important to work in pairs. It helps build something called intercoder reliability. And that's really important because if you're doing it by yourself, even with a code book, inherent biases could creep in. But if you work in pairs, you can hold each other accountable. You should go through each line of your data and attribute a code. If a code doesn't fit that line of data, you should think about adding a code to your code book. But make sure you tell everyone in the team who's working on this, and make sure you document it in that code book. Once you've gone through each line of your data, everything should have a code. This includes things like chit-chat and questions. Nothing should be left without a tag. You should take your time with this stage. For us, it took us almost a week. It might take you as long, or it might take you a little bit longer, but it's probably the longest part of the process. Once you finish this stage, you should end up with all of your data having codes. In most examples, this will end up with a high-level code. This is called a thematic code. Underneath that will be a subcode. This is a baby code that is attributed to that bigger code. For example, if we take the quote, "Before I came to prison, I was in and out of violent relationships." you might end up with a high-level code of prior relationships before prison and a subcode of negative.
Step number 4, map your data. So you've collected your data using open-ended reach questions, you wrote a code book, and you coded your data. It is now time for you to start mapping your data and finding patterns. Do any of the participants share the same views on a particular theme? What about across different themes? If so, group them together into a persona. How did we do this? We had 2,700 minutes of interviews, so we had to be very organized on how to process our data. We transferred everything from Dovetail onto Miro. So basically, each bit of coded data from Dovetail had become a sticky note on Miro. What we did in essence was moving 45 transcripts into about 1,000 sticky notes. We then created a template on Miro where we attributed the name of the code as the head of the template, and we attributed the subcodes as the scalars onto that template. We have also created a unique color code for each participant. Then it was all about matching. Does that particular participant express any view on that particular subcode? If so, we moved their sticky note onto that point of the scalar. And we did that for every single bit of information that we had on Miro. Basically, for every single line of the transcripts that we had. By doing this, we were able to visualize where participants had similar traces. We could see, for example, that yellow and mustard were always together, whereas green and blue were never together, regardless of the team. This will organically move you on to the next and final stage.
Step 5, the last stage. It's time to uncover your personas. We used a computer, and actually we used Google Sheets for this step, but you don't have to. We wrote a simple algorithm that looked for 3 matches across our participants. So for example, it checked to see if they would share the same views or attitudes for the reason that they did the crime, their relationships before prison, and their attitude to release afterwards.
Could a prisoner, for example, have the same reason for crime as another prisoner, let's say it was because of money, and they also had troubled relationships before they got into prison, and then they also experienced difficulties maintaining relationships while in prison, and this people would repeat over and over and over again. A machine is much better at doing that and finding those patterns than the human eye. You might want to use an algorithm to validate your thinking. Perhaps you've already started to see some patterns emerging from mapping your data. We have used it to validate our hypothesis, or you might want to use an algorithm to surface those patterns for you from scratch.
But once you've mapped your data as you did in step 4, you could also do this by hand. So there we have it, our 5-step framework for building successful personas. Let's summarize. Step 1, ask rich, open-ended questions so that you get relevant information. Step 2, write that codebook so that you can analyze your data consistently. Step 3, use that codebook to attribute tags to all of your data points so that you end up with a library of tagged insights. Step 4, map that data so that you can start to see the relationships between participants within your decoded data insights. Step 5, look for patterns across your themes so that you can see where your personas are.
All right, so we talked about what is the problem with personas, how can we revive them, and we have given you a step-by-step onto how to build representative personas. So what now? You basically have personas that don't suck anymore. Are you done? No. So how can you make sure that your personas won't end up in a drawer? When it comes to designing artifacts, here is what matters. In our process, we ended up with 5 personas. Let me show you a complete example of how that looks like. We used color and graphics for visual learners. We thought about a color that could represent certain features of that persona, and we used it consistently throughout the artifact that we designed. We have also designed a graphic that illustrates a dominant feature from that persona. Both the use of color and graphics will help your staff to create visual associations with that persona.
Next, we wanted to create some anchors. Nobody remembers Dave the Marketer, but you can be sure that a Greek god will stick in people's minds. This was also a provocation. It's quite controversial to associate prisoners with Greek gods, but it forces people to abandon their preconceptions. We use the Greek god metaphor, but you can use any type of metaphor that you can think of. It doesn't matter, but it should try and avoid associations to humans so that you don't rely on that inherent bias that is in all of us. Next, we have the storytelling element. As you probably remember, we learned this from plays, books, and museums. We wanted to incorporate a story that conveyed the rich history of the people that we met. It's important to remember that this story should be short and succinct, but easy to read and give you a deep insight into what makes up that person. Lastly, we have our quick data points. These are easily referenceable and good for people who are more quantitative learners. But it's also important to mention that this is not new data. We use the same data in the story as we use here to make sure that no matter where you access our persona cards from, you always get the same outcome and you learn the same things. First up, we've got quote cards. We designed 31 insights from our interviews. These are quotes that our users communicated to us that we felt conveyed what it's like to be a prisoner in our system. We designed them into quote cards so that they can be used every day during a team ceremony that we have called Stand Up. This means that the team is automatically orientated at the start of the day into our users' shoes. You don't have to do this though. You could create quote cards that you put on senior stakeholders' desks, or you could create a Slack bot or something similar.
Finally, like all teams during COVID-19, we had to pivot to a digital world. We had this brilliant idea of doing like a launch event where we could invite our stakeholders and walk them through the profiles and do like this mini museum, but then we had to change things up. We ended up designing a website where we put a lot of insights and information that we've collected during the research phase. We have also put a pack where people can download information and listen to short stories, audio clips, and have a better understanding of what life in prison feels like, looks like, and who are the people in prison. So what we are saying is that for your personas to work and for them to be a success, you should make them accessible, you should make them inclusive, you should make them playful, and you should make them consistent.
In this talk, we've covered why we think personas are dead. We've told you how we're going to go about reviving them, and we've given you a handy 5-step framework for following our process. Lastly, we've shown you how we think personas can have maximum impact in your organization.
Well, so now it's just up to you really. If you weren't convinced that your personas suck before this presentation, I hope that by now you are.
Your personas suck, you know it, but you're still doing things the same way. You should probably stop. We've given you the tools and tips and tricks for doing them the right way. So get to it. Stop going to work every day doing a job that you love representing users the wrong way.
It's up to you. Do the thing, but do it better.
Thank you.
Thank you.